I sure do want you to preach your lesson that I've heard you preach on providence while you're here. And I thought about it a second, and I said, can you remember what I said? Because I tell you, there are a lot of my sermons that are non-repeatable. But this morning, I do have some recollections of at least some things that I've had to say in the past about the hard sayings of Jesus. I'm going to be talking with you basically this morning out of the 19th chapter of Matthew. But the fact of the matter is we can talk about out of a lot of different places. And we will look at one or two other verses this morning. But it is remarkable that Jesus said such hard things. I mean, the picture of Jesus as being sweet-spirited, and which he was, and kind and gentle, which he was, is somehow not at variance at all with the fact that what Jesus was is so directly spoken. He told the truth. And the truth is frequently hard. And what we need to do is we need to confront it just as it is. Now, in Matthew 19, I take us to Matthew 19 because I can find there three different kind of exchanges with three different sets of people, in which Jesus gives answers that are so direct that they amaze the people. In fact, they amaze his disciples, and they take the people aback in each case and leave them disappointed a part of the time. Well, let's look at these three examples and the kind of honesty that they call us to. Let's look first at the passage that begins in verse 16, which is a familiar exchange. And behold, one came and said to him, Good master, what good thing shall I do that I may have eternal life? And he said unto him, Why callest thou me good? There is none good but one, that is God. But if thou wilt enter into life, keep the commandments. And he said unto him, Which? Jesus said, Thou shalt do no murder, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, honor thy father and thy mother, and thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. The young man said unto him, All these things have I kept from my youth up. What lack I yet? Jesus said unto him, If thou wilt be perfect, go and sell that thou hast, and give to the poor, and thou shalt have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me. But when the young man heard that saying, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. Well, all right, this is the story of the rich young man, or the rich young ruler, as he's described in this passage in Mark 10th chapter. Now, the interesting thing about this exchange to me is that what we've got Jesus talking to a good young man who comes up to him and said, what do I need to do to have eternal life? And it's a good question. And Jesus gives him a direct and honest and easy answer. And I'll tell you, the question and the answer are good for us. And that is, Jesus a lot of times just gives such obvious answers. But his answer is, well, what you need to do is go do what God said. Now, that's still the answer to that question. If somebody comes along and says, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? The answer is just do what God says. In fact, I'm not going to talk with you about it this morning. I preach a sermon sometimes on that question that when Jesus is asked by the man, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And he says, well, what do you read in the law? What does the law say? If you want to know the answer to a question, the answer to the question, what I need to do is go read your Bible and see what it says and go do that. That's the answer. Well, all right. So he says, go keep the commandments. And he said, which commandments? And he said, well, the ones that God gave to the Jews. You go keep those. And the fellow says, well, I've done that. So I take it he must have been a good man. But he said, what else do I need to do? And I've always said, as I tell this story, that it might be a good lesson on when you need to keep your mouth shut. I mean, if the Lord answered and said, go do these things, if a fellow could say, well, I've done that, maybe he ought to just shut up at that point. But he went on and said, what else do I need to do? And there was more. And there is more. And Jesus said, what you need to do is you just need to go home and sell everything you got and come and go with me. He said the fellow thought about that, and he went away, and he was saddened by that because he had great possessions. He had lots of things, and he didn't want to leave those. And so he didn't follow the Lord. Now let me just tell you to begin with this morning that I used to think that was really hard. And I have to tell you that I now have got a perspective on that where I can honestly say this morning that I don't think that was such a hard thing that Jesus told him to do. That the fact of the matter is, if I can get that straight in my mind, I believe that I'd do that. Now you say, wait a minute, now you mean you'd go sell your house and everything you got this morning for the Lord? Well, I tell you, if Jesus was here this morning, now, I mean, I really believe him. I believe he was the Son of God. And if Jesus were here this morning and he said, Ed, Harrell, what you need to do is you just need to go sell your stuff and come on and go with me, I want to tell you I am 100% sure I'd go. And you think I wouldn't go with Jesus and have the opportunity to listen to him, to talk with him and ask him questions? Oh, the problem was whether this fellow really understood what was being offered to him. I mean, what was being offered to him was the opportunity to go with the Son of God. And when you think about that, I don't care how much money they, it wouldn't take me all that long to sell all I got. But this fella, it might have taken him a while to get rid of what he had. But nonetheless, when you put that in context, that hard saying becomes a tremendous opportunity. Now, what I want to suggest to you this morning is that I think in a way that same thing is presented to all of us over and over again in life. And that this is not the only person that was ever told to do just exactly that. And that is to get rid of everything you have and come follow me. For instance, over in Matthew the 10th chapter, and beginning in verse 34, there is a much more general kind of statement that makes that applicable to all of us. When Jesus said, think not that I'm come to send peace on earth, I came not to send peace, but a sword. For I'm come to set a man at variance against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foe shall be they of his own household. He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of it. And he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of it. And he that taketh not his cross and followeth after me is not worthy of it. Now I'll tell you what everybody faces, Jesus says, is all of us face the proposition that if we're going to follow the Lord, that has to be the first thing in our life. And everything else has to take second place. That I mean I will follow him before I follow family. You know, I've asked a lot of people to leave father and mother. And I've baptized some people that that's exactly what they had to do. I remember years ago, probably 30 years ago, I was in a tent meeting in Florida and baptized a young woman one night, and everybody finally went home and she was still hanging around. She came up to me after nearly everyone was gone. She said, Brother Harrell, she said, I wonder if you would mind going home with me. She said, I'm scared to go home. And so I went home with her, and I tell you, when I got home, I was scared too. Because there was a bunch of mad folks there that sure wanted to whip me, and I'm glad I took a great big fella with me when I went. So it didn't come to that. But I'll tell you, she understood what that meant. That it cost you something to follow the Lord. And that has to come before father and mother, brothers and sisters. I went to teach a young couple one time a few years ago with a friend of mine, and he later on baptized them. They'd been Roman Catholic. And he told me this story about what had happened. Actually, he sent me a copy of a letter the young woman had written to her family. And it was a wonderful letter in which she told what she had found, that she had found people that were just Christians, that they didn't belong to any denomination, but they just tried to do what was in the Bible, and they were just trying to be Christians. But anyhow, then she went home to St. Louis to try to teach her family. And when she came back, she told my friend this story. She said that she taught her two sisters first. And that her two sisters were encouraged, and they saw it, and they wanted to go be baptized. And then later on, the same day, she taught her mother and daddy. It made her mother and daddy mad. In fact, it made them so angry, she said, that then her two sisters said, well, maybe they better not do anything right then. And when she got to that point in her story, my friend began to commiserate with her, sympathize, and say, oh, well, I'm sure I'm sorry, and maybe next time you go home, maybe they'll be better and feel better about it. And she stopped. And she said, no, she said, it's all right. She said, they are not worthy of it. Well, that's hard, isn't it? But that's right. That's exactly what Jesus said. He said, if you're not going to put me above mother and daddy, husband and wife, brothers and sisters, sons and daughters, if you're not willing to go home and sell what you got and come follow me, then you can't be my disciple. There isn't but one way you can be my disciple, and that is if you say, my life belongs to the Lord. Now let me tell you that I believe all of us go through that. I don't believe you just do it when you're baptized. I believe you do it all your life. I'll tell you how my mind works and how your mind works. If somebody asks me a question, I'll tell you how that goes through my head. I've already got all kind of stuff stored up in my head in answers to questions anyhow. So if somebody asks me a question, I'll tell you what's going to come out first is just what I already got stored up there. But somebody might press that, and I have to think about it. And if somebody really asks me a troubling question about what I believe, it bounces around in all kinds of things, and I think to myself, well, now what do I believe about that? And I wonder how my daddy felt about that, and I wonder what the brethren think about that, and I wonder what effect that'd have on my family if I accepted that, and I wonder how that influenced my job if I did that. And all that is to say is that we have complex relationships out here, and all of us have families, and all of us have friends, and all of us have jobs, and those are proper relationships, and in fact God instructs us how to carry those relationships out properly. But here's the thing. When the Lord speaks to them, all those relationships don't mean anything. They don't make any difference. What has to come first is what God tells us. And that's what he's teaching this young man. That your family and your job and your possessions and whether you got any money and your friends and your place and your position, none of those things make any difference. There isn't but one thing that makes any difference, and that is whether you'll come follow me. And I want to tell you, that's what makes you a Christian. That's the only thing that'll keep you a Christian. A lot of times, people will ask me, well, Brother Harrell, what do you think's the next thing going to come along that'll bother the church? And what do you think's the next problem that people will have? I don't have the slightest idea, because the only limits are the ingenuity of the human mind, whatever somebody can think of. But I will tell you this, there isn't but one solution. And that is, if we really have in mind that what I mean to do is just read my Bible, and follow the Lord, be loyal to the truth and nothing else. Because what happens is, the time comes when somebody comes along and says, look, I believe that we're not doing this like we ought to do it. And all of a sudden, to abandon it will cost jobs, and cost money, and cost friends, and cost associations. And we're right where this fellow was when the Lord told him, what you're going to have to do is leave what you got and come follow me. And I want to tell you that you'll go through that test many times in your life. Well, all right, let's turn to the second confrontation in Matthew, the 19th chapter. That begins in verse 3, in a familiar passage. The Pharisees also came unto him, tempting him, saying unto him, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? And he answered and said unto them, have ye not read that he that made them in the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. They say unto him, why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement, and to put her away? He saith unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your heart, suffered you to put away your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery, and whosoever marrieth her, which is put away, doth commit adultery. Now, I'm going to go on in just a second, because I'm not primarily going to discuss this issue of marriage and divorce with you, but let me just say that as Jesus was teaching, what happens is the Pharisees come and say, well, how about getting divorced? Is it okay to get a divorce? And Jesus said, no, it's not. That's not the way God made it. And they said, well, Moses let us. He said, well, there's a reason for that. But what I want to tell you is that's not the way it is in God's mind, and that's not the way that God approves of it. And that what I'm telling you is that anybody that does that and marries somebody else is adultery. Well, that's a message that we need in our society just on the face of it. But what I want to talk with you about more particularly this morning is the exchange that follows that. His disciples say unto him, and if the case of the man be so with his wife, it's not good to marry. I'll tell you what that teaching did. Is that teaching drew a reaction of, that's hard. The disciples came along and said, well, what do you mean? You mean that when you get married, you have to stay married all your life? And Jesus said, yeah, that's what I mean. They said, oh, that's hard. You mean you got to stay married to the same one? He said, yeah. He said, well, if you got to stay married to the same one all your life, he said, it'd be better not to get married than to have to do that. It'd just be better not to do it. Well, you know, a lot of people will read a lot of different things in the Bible and say, oh, that just couldn't be so. You mean that means exactly what it says here? Why, that couldn't be. There are all kind of bad consequences that go with that. Remember what Jesus said? But he said unto them, all men cannot receive this saying, save they to whom it's given. For there are some eunuchs which were so born from their mother's womb, And there are some eunuchs which are made eunuchs of men, and there be eunuchs which made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. He that's able to receive him, let him receive it. I'll tell you what the disciples did. The disciples came along and said, well, now look, that's a rule. That's just too hard to follow. We can't do that. Because you might get married and your wife would get ugly to you, or she would do things that you didn't like, and surely there had to be some reason that you'd be able to put her away. Or it would be better just to be celibate. I mean, it'd be better just to give up sex. And Jesus said, and what they did is they had him in a corner then. They said, well, you know, I'm sure you're not saying that. And Jesus said, yeah, that'd be fine. He said, if that's what you need to do, just do that. That if what you're saying, what I'm saying, is so hard that we just can't do that, you couldn't expect us to do that, he'd say, yeah, if you have to do that, then do that. Let me tell you something just about that marriage thing. Do you know there are people that can't get married? A lot of times people come along and say, oh, we just couldn't make it. And went, well, yeah, you could make it. You could, I know. Some people never get asked. And there are people who have handicaps of some kind or another that can't get married. There are people who get married and their mates leave them. They're sorry. And I tell you what they do. They do what they have to do. They do what's right. And the lesson that teaches, it strikes me, is another lesson that has a hard side to it, but it's a really important side that Jesus taught in another variety of ways. For instance, I'm going to turn back over and look at Matthew the 5th chapter for just a moment, in the midst of the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus said, beginning verse 27, you've heard that it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery, but I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. And if thy right hand offend thee, if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out, cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. And if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off, and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. I'll tell you the lesson is that if God says something and it becomes hard to do that, what you need to do is look at that in terms of the consequences. And what Jesus says is that's better than going to hell. He said, I will tell you this, that you need to not commit adultery. Because what that'll do is that'll send you to hell. And if what it meant was that you had to pull your eyes out or cut your hands off, then you'd be better off. Now, I don't believe that Jesus is teaching self-mutilation. And all you have to do is read the passage to understand that he doesn't mean you can quit thinking bad thoughts by pulling your eyes out. You can't do that. And you can't stop wanting to be a thief by cutting your hands off. Because you sin in your mind, anyhow. And you could do that without hands or without eyes. But I'll tell you what he's saying. Is he saying, it'd be better to be blind than to go to hell. And it'd be better to go through life without any hands than to go to hell. Something happened when I was living in Nashville years ago that I always will remember when I go across that point. There was an accident in Nashville. And this truck had turned over. And it had pinned the driver. He was pinned by his legs. And they had a picture up there on the front page of the newspaper. And the truck was on fire. And it was so hot that nobody could get to this fellow. But he was conscious for a minute. He was just cooking. And before he died. But before he died, he screamed and yelled to the people that were standing by, begged somebody to come in, cut his legs off, pull him out. I'll tell you what he knew. He knew what Jesus was talking about in Matthew 5. When he said it'd be better to cut your hand off than it would be to go to hell. And I will tell you that that is what we need to get in mind. That there are no excuses. And it won't do to go to hell. I'll tell you what we do. We tend to offer excuses for our sorriness. Flimsy excuses. I was preaching several years ago in Alabama, and I ran into a fellow that I'd known years ago. He's a physician. And he had really been a good Christian when I ran across him the first time. Working hard and everything. And the second time I ran across him, which was probably 15 years later, he'd gotten sorry. And he just wasn't doing near what he ought to be doing. And so I got him aside and talked to him. And I said, Bill, you have really drifted. And I'll tell you what he gave me. He gave me this old doctor story. He said, well, my work has just gotten so hard, and I get all of these calls, and I'm on call all the time, and I have to do this, and I just can't go when they call me from the hospital saying somebody needs you. He said, nothing I can do but go. And I'll tell you what I told him. I said, Ben, I'll tell you what you need to do. You need to quit being a doctor. You need to get you a job at a factory out here or a filling station or something somewhere. And just quit doing that. If that's going to keep you from going to heaven, let me tell you something. I don't care how important you think you are, or how busy you are, or what your job is. If we're not doing what's right, what we need to do is quit it and get our lives straight, because it won't do to go to hell. And that's what he told those disciples in Matthew 19. You think that's hard? Forget it. You straighten your life up and do what's right. Because what you need to do is be sure that you don't end up losing your soul. Well, one other exchange in Matthew 19. And that's the one right at the end of the chapter. After Jesus had talked to his disciples about a rich man, being hard for a rich man to enter in, after he had talked to the rich young man. In verse 27, he said, then answers Peter and said unto him, behold, we've forsaken all and followed thee. What shall we have therefore? And Jesus said unto them, verily I say unto you, that ye which have followed me, in the regeneration, when the Son of Man shall sit in the throne of his glory, ye also shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And everyone that hath forsaken houses, or brethren, or sisters, or father, or mother, or wife, or children, or lands, for my name's sake, shall receive 100-fold, and shall inherit everlasting life. But many that are first shall be last, and the last shall be first. I'll tell you what the disciples did. The disciples came up to him and said, well, we've done all this. We've followed you, and we've forsaken everything. We've sacrificed. We've given things up. What are we going to get out of it? Show me what good this is going to do. And I want to tell you, I believe a lot of people still want something in this life out of what they're doing. That there are a lot of brethren that they'll work as long as you brag on them enough, or we'll do things if we can see the reward. But I'll tell you what Jesus said. He said, don't worry about that. And if we read the account over in Mark, which I'm not going to do, we can see that what they did, it says they were amazed. That is, they still didn't get the point after Jesus essentially tells them, you're not going to get anything out of it except a hard time. You might get some suffering, but what you need to do is you need not worry about that, because what I'm telling you is eventually you'll get something out of it. And you need to invest yourself and come and follow me, not worrying about the reward. I want to go over and look at one other passage in the Sermon on the Mount with you. In Matthew the 6th chapter, when Jesus said that what our responsibility is to get about the business of putting our lives in His work and not worry about what kind of reward we're going to get out of it down here. That the reward is going to come later. Lay not up for yourselves treasures up on earth, where moth and dust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Now let me tell you that I believe the final lesson that all of us need to learn is that we work because we have a vision out there. And insomuch as we do that, then it gives us something to work for. I'll tell you the problem with most of us is that we're investing our lives in the wrong thing. We need to get about the business of investing our lives in the Lord's work and understanding that that'll pay off. And then what happens is our heart gets there too. Where our treasures are, that's where our heart's going to be. I'll tell you why I do these meetings. I do these meetings even though it's really very hard for me to do it, because I've got so much else going on in my life. But I do them because I need to do them to keep straight what my life's all about and where my treasure is. My mother died several years ago, and before she died, I would go home every time I had a chance to Jacksonville, Florida, and I would visit. And she was sick in bed for several years before she died. I'd always try to think of something I could say to encourage her when I'd go in there. And she and my daddy always wanted me to preach, and they were always concerned that maybe sometime I'd quit if my other career went ahead. So I'd always try to reassure them about that. But anyhow, I went into my mother and I said, well, Mother, I said, I sure have been preaching a lot. I said, I went 42 places last year, or something like that. She thought about it a minute. She said, is it doing you any good? Well, your mother will keep you humble. But I said, it's keeping me off the streets at night. But let me tell you the answer to that. It's doing me more good than anybody. Because it keeps in my mind where my heart ought to be. We need to work. I'll tell you one quick story. I think I've got time to tell of something that really interested me a few years ago that I learned about the cults out here in the world. And that is, they've learned to make people give. I got a call from the Mooney headquarters in Tarrytown, New York, in my office one day. And the Moonies, this guy invited me and said, we would like for you to come talk to a convention of Moonies. Now, the reason they did that is because I've written a couple of books about the restoration movement, and they have an idea of restoration. They've read my book. And they said, we want you to come talk to us about Mr. Moon's idea on restoration. And I said, I don't think I'd be interested in doing that. And they said, well, now, if you will come, they said, we will fly you and your wife to the Canary Islands for 8 days and put you up in a 5-star hotel. And I said, well, I'll check my calendar. So I checked my calendar, and the upshot of that is I went and talked to him, and I told him that Mr. Moon's ideas were just absolute foolishness, that he didn't know anything about history and he didn't know anything about the Bible. And we had some interesting conversations growing out of that. But I'll tell you what I would do. I got some of those young Mooney boys who were very smart to finally admit that some of his teachings were wrong. And I was pressing one of them one night. And he'd admit this was wrong, this was wrong. Finally I said to him, well, now look, if this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, why are you a Mooney? And he told me a story. Here's his little story quick. He said, I became a Mooney 7 years ago. in Chicago, and he said they put me on a bus and sent me to San Francisco. And he said when I got to San Francisco, I didn't have but $2. And he said I didn't know what to do. And I just went up on top of the tallest building in San Francisco. And he said I prayed. And I said, Lord, here I am. I'm your man in San Francisco. Just use me any way you can use me. And he said I went down, bought $2 worth of candy bars, and sold them for $4. Bought $4 worth, sold for $8 and so on. And I stopped him and I said, okay, let me tell you what you've told me. You've told me I'm a Mooney because I have invested 7 hard years of my life in it. And I don't want to give it up. And I told him, I said, now that's a bad reason for being what you are. People invest their lives in all kind of terrible things. And you have to base your life on truth, not on just your experience, what you've done. But let me tell you the other side of that story. Your life is never going to have any direction unless you invest it. And I'll tell you the lesson we need to learn is to not live my life saying, well, what am I going to get out of this? What good is this going to do me? Can you take this to the supermarket? I'll tell you the answer to that. You need to give up your lands and your family and your homes and your comfort, and I need to get out of my chair in the evening and turn that TV off and go do something so I can lay some treasures in it. And I understand that the Lord's going to take care of seeing that I get all the credit I need for that, and that I'll receive my reward in due time as I ought to. And my love for the Lord will be exactly commensurate to the service that I've given to Him. Like Jesus told those disciples is, you come follow me. You spend your lives and your time investing them in my service. And you can entrust that to me. You'll get just exactly all that God can give to those that love Him. Well, our time's up, and I appreciate your attention.